time was as happy as the Washington family. People were becoming upset at the King of England, who was taxing Americans more and more heavily. They were also upset because the king told them that they had to keep English soldiers in their houses. The Americans thought the rules and taxes were unfair, but the king just wouldn't listen to their side of the story. So many Americans decided to break away from England, but that would mean war. People discussed who could lead America against England, whose army at that time was the best in the world. George Washington was selected. As a surveyor, he knew the lands where battles might be fought, and that would certainly help American soldiers. And as an officer who had studied military science, he could make clever battle plans. The American soldiers went through many hardships during the war, and perhaps most generals would have given up. But not General George Washington. He was an excellent leader, courageous and clever. The war lasted for 5 long years, but the Americans finally won, and a new nation, the United States of America, was founded. It had 13 states. And who could be its leader? That's right, George Washington. He became our nation's first president, and he led the country with wisdom and honor. Over the years, the United States grew. New states were added. One of them was Kentucky, where another great president, Abraham Lincoln, was born. He lived in a small log cabin when he was very young. When Abraham was 7, his family moved to Indiana. His father, Thomas Lincoln, felt he could no longer live in a state, such as Kentucky, that allowed white people to own black slaves. In those days, many African Americans were slaves. They weren't paid for their work, often picking cotton under a blazing hot sun. They couldn't come and go as they wished, and they were treated very poorly in many other ways too. The Lincolns, like many other poor pioneer families, lived a very hard life also, but it was certainly better than a slave family's life. Young Abraham, for example, went to school, but only in late fall and winter, when there were fewer chores to be done around the house and farm. His little one-room schoolhouse was a 2-hour walk to and from his home. Besides being a time for school, the cold months were also time to read by the warm, cozy fireplace. Abraham loved to read and learn about new things. Several years after the Lincolns moved to Indiana, Abraham's mother became very sick and died. Abraham's father then married Sally Johnston. Sally's husband also had died and left her with 3 children. Sally and Abraham liked each other immediately. In time, she would learn that her stepson was very smart, so she made certain that he went to school whenever possible. Time passed, and Abraham became well known in his little Indiana community as a scholar. He also became known as a hard-working and very strong young man. When he was 19, he and a friend traveled down the Mississippi River to take a load of farm crops to the city of New Orleans. There, he saw a slave market, a place where African Americans were bought and sold. The market saddened and deeply troubled Abraham. He couldn't understand how people could treat their fellow human beings so terribly. 2 years later, the Lincolns moved to New Salem, Illinois. Now Abraham was 21 and ready to set out on his own. He worked as a clerk in a small store, and like George Washington, surveyed land, and he became known for his honesty. Once a customer left behind a small amount of tea she had bought. It was worth only a few pennies, But when Abe discovered the tea, he walked more than 10 miles to the woman's house to make certain that she got it. In a short time, he became known far and wide as Honest Abe. He continued to read and study, particularly law books. You see, Abraham Lincoln decided that he wanted to be a lawyer. And that's what happened. He helped many people as a lawyer, and he became even more well-liked and respected. In time, the citizens of New Salem and other nearby communities elected him to the state legislature of Illinois, where Honest Abe helped decide what laws should be made for that state. Then they elected him to the United States Congress, where laws are made for the entire country. At that time, Congress was divided over an important question. When new states were established, should they allow slavery? Abraham Lincoln said slavery should not be allowed. He knew that it was wrong. As in Congress, people all over the country discussed whether slavery should be stopped. One group who wanted slavery outlawed, they called themselves Republicans, asked Honest Abe to run for president. He did, and he won. But there was little time to celebrate. Within months, the states that wanted slavery, called the Confederate States of America,